today. There'll be lots of technical snafus just to get you in the mood. Bevan Scott is a film cinematographer and a film colorist and a filmmaker and also an educator. He's given many talks and lectures here at the VIFF Center over the last couple of years. He's going to talk for about 20 minutes, give or take, to contextualize Playtime. We're going to watch it together, and you're invited to stay at the end for a talk back. Simple as that. Devin, have fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom. It's a great privilege to be here to talk about this film. It's very, I've talked about, I think, a few of my favorite films in this room, but I've never felt quite so overmatched by a film as this. It is a film that certain people around me who I trust very much get very angry when I don't say is clearly the best comedy ever. It probably is, but there's other contenders. Maybe not. Don't get angry. And that might be funny to say about a film in which, the man sits on the chair and makes it sound like a whoopee cushion. But that would be to do, that's both an accurate description of Jacques Tati and a bit of a disservice to him. There is one anecdote from Jacques Tati, who is the director of this film. You can see him there directing this movie. There's one anecdote from his school years that he is credited in his memoirs as kind of the genesis of his comedic talents, and that was in English school. A teacher, his teacher was using what's called the direct method, which is I say something, you do something, and so teacher would Jacques Tati, young whippersnapper, was assigned a task of the teacher would say, you open the door, Tati opens the door, you close the door. Tati closes the door, says, I am closing the door, simple rote. Tati thought it would be funny if, upon closing the classroom door, at this point, he closed it from the outside of the classroom. And at that point, Tati waited outside the classroom, kind of wondering how long should he wait to go back in. As the anticipation built within the classroom, which he could somehow see, according to him, he never went back in, he went home. And so, this kind of deconstruction, this idea of comedy by omission, runs through his films. Playtime ostensibly stars Monsieur Hulot, which is Tati's most kind of enduring contribution to pop culture. He is both a figure right in the, there he is actually playing him on the right. He is a figure right in the tradition of silent kind of film comic characters, while also being a response to them, right? He leans forward while Chaplin's tramp stands stock straight. He's idle, whereas, the characters of Keaton, Chaplin, and Lloyd are active, kind of agents in their stories. This is a character mostly defined by his relative passivity. However, the other major implication of this character that I think impacts on Playtime is that Mr. Hulot was Tati's ticket to basically separating himself completely from the French film industry. He made his debut as Hulot in Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, and it's a worldwide success, and especially the worldwide success of its successor, Mon Oncle, allowed him to essentially cloister himself, basically not pay any attention to little matters such as the French New Wave, and spend years and years making Playtime, which is what we're going to discuss today. Playtime is a self-conscious masterpiece by a figure who retained his deep independence and alienation from mainstream French cinema. And this all despite the fact that Tati was among the 9 names that Truffaut listed as the good ones, as far as artistically interesting auteurs. And so Tati put his entire career and financial safety on the line for this film. It went over 2,000% over budget, and it ended up actually destroying his career and destroying the company he made. It was one of the biggest financial failures in world cinema history. and we're all the better for it. So all that is to say, though, that I'm going to use my clicker here so I can actually make this good for me. All that is to say that Playtime, though, is an odd entry into Jacques Tati. Who here has seen a Jacques Tati film? Raise your hand if you have. Raise your hand if you have not. All right, so we're at 50-50. Who here has seen Playtime? Raise your hand if you have. Oh, far less. Okay. So Playtime is, in many ways, Jacques Tati's response to his own work, which is Mon Oncle. Mon Oncle, his previous film, is kind of satire about about many things, but it's especially about the contrast between the old French society, this kind of village market life, and these cloistered kind of bourgeois suburbanites, as you can see by the right angles of their house. This is a good way to get into Jacques Tati because it's accessible, and Tati didn't like that. He thought the film. I'm going to actually read a direct quote from him about this. If I can pause it, there we go. He said, I quote, "I had come up with a really good subject and wrote a well-shaped scenario with it. I had thought to myself, well, now you're getting really serious. But suddenly, looking at this too well-made play, I felt old. To rejuvenate myself, I changed subject, took a different track, with something entirely lacking in construction. I like that. It makes me happy." And so to understand Playtime, we have to understand that this is a film that goes out of its way to swim against the current of virtually all form and narrative cinema. This is a film that does not operate like almost any other film. So I'm going to just highlight a couple of ways in which it is operating so that we can kind of decode it, because this is a film that requires a lot of participation from the viewer. And so if I can click, there we go. And so we might look at something as simple as the basics of comedic theory. Traditional comedy often relies on, games of power. Guy one does something mistaken. Guy two laughs at guy one. We laugh with guy two at guy one, right? Tati's films often operate on one of two kind of principles. Either guy one and guy two are the same guy, often Monsieur Hulot, who makes the mistake and is canny enough to realize it. So we both laugh at Monsieur Hulot and sympathize with him. But more common is we laugh at emergent situations in his world. I'm going to play, while I talk, the scene from Playtime. I'm going to try and not spoil too much of Playtime, but I'll pick a few scenes. This is a scene in which we see, as the kind of omniscient viewer, two separate suites in a house, both of which have TVs on adjoining walls. And throughout the scene, we are presented with a series of shots that highlight the way in which one room appears to be reacting to the other room, when in fact they're reacting to two different television shows. There is no butt of the joke here. No one here is made a fool of. It is humor that, in Tati's words, lies not in the actions of the comedian, but in the comedian's ability to reveal the comic dimensions of others and the world's ability to reveal the comic dimensions of these characters. Tati's comedy gags, they don't drive the plots or follow traditional structures. They just exist in the world. They are quirks of a world that is inherently funny. And so we are laughing not at these characters. We are laughing, we are, by dint of our increased understanding of the world, by our particular point of view, laughing at the fundamental mechanics of the situation. And so if we're here looking for punchlines, we are denied them. There is no moment in this scene wherein the comedy is resolved. It just happens and we move on. We are allowed to live with that. We get to decide when to laugh. Let's talk about how that applies to his compositions. Playtime opens with a long, drawn-out scene in wide shot, and Playtime is entirely photographed. Are we playing? Yeah. Playtime is entirely photographed in wide shot with very few exceptions. And by doing this, Tati invites us, the viewer, to wander around the frame with our eyes. Very rarely does he give us a single focal point. Three different people can come away from this film having seen three entirely different works. Sometimes I might focus on the mannequins in the back who begin life appearing as mannequins, and maybe they start moving. Maybe in another shot, they will actually be cardboard cutouts, which happens a few times. Maybe on another viewing, I'm going, wait, I thought this film opens in an airport, but this, by all appearances, appears to be a hospital. We have to do the work of actually figuring out that this is in fact an airport before the appearance of an airplane's tail fin confirms that for us. Or I might be looking at the janitor with nothing to clean, right? And so this attacks film language, right? I mean, you think of Alfred Hitchcock's many great quotes on the subject about how audiences need to be guided. Our eyes need to move. That's what a tracking shot is about, right? We move from one side of the room to the other. We cut to a close-up, so we know that the shot is no longer about the space, but about the emotions on the actor's face. Tati gives us none of that. Monsieur Hulot in this film is introduced incidentally as he drops his umbrella in the background of a shot, and this is not lingered upon at all. And so with this film, we are essentially an active participant in the collaboration of the generation of meaning. We are allowed to choose the movie we're watching as we're going. And so this allows, actually, I'm gonna, let's talk about his use of color. This extends to his use of color. Famously, Playtime features a dramatically desaturated production design. In fact, they engage in such tricks as, for example, anything that looks like brushed steel in the film is actually painted, or it's actually photographic paper of photographs of brushed steel to prevent anything of color from reflecting in it. And so you'll see these repeated reflections. And so major efforts were done to essentially only use color when color generates meaning. Tati in this film treats the default not as colorful, right? We experience color in the world. He treats the default as monochromatic, and he needs to have color justified to him to include it. And so this follows in such experiments as in Jour de Fête, his first feature film, painting the entire town square gray so that the traveling fair that comes to town can stand out from the town. Although that film's color version was never fully finished, it was later restored partially. But so he had been thinking in this mode for decades at this point, and so even in scenes, for example, I've chosen these 4 screenshots to illustrate kind of the contrast, right? Color is introduced in a very bold way at very specific points so as to stand out. We hear a lot of directors talk about how you don't shoot everything in close-up. You choose when to use your close-ups for maximum impact, right? That's a common element of film grammar. For Tati, color functions in a similar way. He only chooses color when it has the maximum impact. Otherwise, he denies us color. Sound and the deployment of it might be the single most characteristic element of his films, however. Jacques Tati got his start actually as kind of the class clown for his rugby team. The funny story of that is that he ended up becoming so successful, the rugby team turned into a theater troupe. So they stopped playing rugby and they became more famous for their musical antics. But this influence, where Tati might, for example, mime a boxing match or mime a cyclist with a single musician off stage, Mickey Mousing his actions. So, for example, a cello might be, a cello hit would be a move, would match a move in a boxing match, like a hit. And so this kind of synthesized sound, right? You do not sound like a cello when you hit someone while boxing, informs this work. And so Tati's films rely heavily on synchronicity. The thing about cinema is that you're denied a lot of information. And our minds are constantly processing the information around us to contextualize sound, right? If something makes a sound, our brain doesn't go, oh, I know what that is. It goes, oh, that ringing is, okay, that ringing sounds like it might come from something in this. I'm in the theater. Oh, that's a fire alarm. I know because I'm in the theater and I smell smoke. I don't actually, but so I'm actually interpreting numerous things to make that mysterious sound have meaning. Cinema denies us a lot of that. And so the most common way we create meaning in terms of sound in cinema is synchronicity. We see something happen on screen and a sound occurs. Now I'm going to play a scene in which Jacques Tati sits on a chair. And I want you to ask yourself, does that sound like I'd expect a chair to sound? And so sound in Teddy's films is not designed to faithfully replicate, I just, last year we did a whole Foley session for a film. And, a punch is a cantaloupe getting hit or something. Thunder is a metallic sheet getting waved. Those, however, are designed to actually replicate the specific timbre of those sounds. Teddy doesn't prioritize that at all. He prioritizes the expression of a certain character in an object. He also uses it to create, dramatic irony between what the audience hears, what the characters hear, and what the characters think they hear. And so, is my clicker out of battery? I think that's what's happening today. There we go. And so we can see a scene such as this one later in Playtime, in which he inverts our understanding of what a door ought to sound like. We're going to hear a salesman sell a silent door where you can slam your doors in peace.
Mein Werk, was ich mit viel Arbeit gemacht habe. Matsch, viel Matsch, verstehen Sie? Wir haben hier dieses ausgezeichnete Material. Nous sommes les premiers à étudier le silence. Et ça, c'est le progrès, hein? Das ist ein Fortschritt, verstehen Sie, nicht wahr? Dummkopf.
And so the joke here, it is not necessarily the slamming of the door, which is funny. The joke here is that Monsieur Hulot has been denied the sensory input of the door being slammed and therefore cannot interpret what's just happened. And there he briefly thinks this man has disappeared. So he is inverting that relationship of sound, character, and what it's supposed to be telling us, the audience. But I'd also like to add, too, that if you'll notice, the synchronization between what that man was saying and his mouth was completely wrong, right? Every single sound you hear in these films is accomplished in post-production. These were shot without on-set sound. We might not, so we can actually think of that door slam as not so much being him taking away that sound, but choosing not to add it, right? And so all the sound in these films is additive. And so that door slam is more faithful to what was recorded on the day than all the sounds that you do hear that appear to come from the scene. And then I wanted to also highlight a scene from Jour de Fête. And I'm going to play a bit of the scene without any sound at all. And this is to highlight how Tati often writes his scenes and shoots them with the knowledge that the only kind of way to actually glean meaning from any of them is sound. Let's play 30 seconds of this without sound. Oh, I can just mute it here. There we go. So what Tati's not doing here is he's not cutting to the source of the sound. He's not giving us the visual information as to what's going on upstairs. In a more traditional film, we would cut upstairs. But in this film, we only hear it. And then so, you finally get humor out of the ridiculous juxtaposition out of what that man is taking into and out of the room and the sounds being made. So Tati is acutely aware of the way in which we receive sound as an audience and how that creates meaning. So throughout Playtime, we're going to encounter sounds that don't appear to have a source, visuals that frustrate our understanding of the sounds, and vice versa. And it's up to us to connect those dots in a multitude of ways, some of which Tati intends, some of which he deliberately leaves open to our interpretation. Lastly, I want to talk about language. So, I'm going to play this one. So in a film like Mon Oncle, which is his prior film to this, language plays a specific role. We contrast, for example, the use of language in the kind of sterile suburban scenes.
et je me suis dit, ce n'est pas possible, il faut que je m'arrête pour savoir ce
que j'attends votre visite, on ne vous voit jamais. Oh, ça pour une surprise.
Je ne voulais pas vous déranger, je vous avais en plein travail.
So for those of you who are fluent in French, they're exchanging pleasantries. But for those of us like me who are not fluent in French, I think are cued here to understand that their language, although it is clear, this is not like a Robert Altman, McCabe, Mrs. Miller thing where you can't hear anything. This is clear language that is being clearly telegraphed to us as insignificant, right? What they are saying is not as important as the way they're walking while they're saying it and the context of what they're saying, where there was a long period of silence before they let themselves talk. We can contrast that with later in the film, a scene like the one at the market square, in which the soundtrack is busy. So you'll notice here that we have many layers of overlapping dialogue. And again, we are not cued in to listen to any one of them. What they're saying is secondary to the amount of people saying it and the texture of how they're saying it. The contrast here is not that these people are somehow elevated above the bourgeois and that they are talking smarter. No, it's that the density of their speech and the freedom of it exemplifies a more kind of what we might call a more busy emotional social life, right? It is the contrast between the texture of the speech that matters here. So what is being said is absolutely secondary. And Playtime takes this to a logical conclusion where what's being said is often completely, I've watched this film multiple times entirely without subtitles and I missed nothing, right? This is not a film where speech is absent, but it's a film where speech is marginalized. And so I'll talk over a little trailer for the film and I'll mute. And so, Tati had no use for manifestos. He was not he never, he never saw himself as a mover of ideas. But he was as obstinately anti-classical Hollywood as any director ever got in terms of the radicalism of his form, at least any director working in what we might call narrative cinema. We're currently in a time when pop cinema is often designed by those in the industry to be ignored, right? To be, they actually call it, Netflix has what's called the second screen content, right? It's content that remains understandable while you are doom scrolling your phone, right? And great directors throughout history have made masterpieces by assuming the audience needs to be guided, right? That we are not full participants. Tati demands a lot of us. He demands that we work with him to make sense of what he is doing. And so what Tati doesn't do is he doesn't use the formal tools of cinema to guide our eyes and our ears. He lays out a big canvas, he fills it with many things working in parallel, and then asks us to participate in that movie. The sound design is a constant game of interpretation, misdirection. The camera direction builds up a framework where we can see much more than we think we have to. And so I'm going to quote Michael Shion here. He says about the film, discontinuous events that happen until they're over. Where there's discontinuity, we look for intention. The stars are separate from each other, and we are here to form Tati's constellation, right? So we've been given a bunch of information and we have to make our own movie out of it. So I invite you to, this is the best place in town to watch this because we're going to see it in beautiful 4K where you can actually, the compression artifacting on the Blu-ray is not present. It's great. We all love it. And we can make out those details better than ever. The stars are clear and this will be a lot of fun. And thank you so much for listening to me ramble about Playtime, and we'll have a talk back after.
All right.